بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is, I believe, our 12th lesson in this series on Taqreeb Tadmuriyyah. And as you recall from the previous lesson, we have concluded the basic introduction which lays the foundations as to how we speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the basic principle regarding that is, since Allah Azza wa Jal is from the unseen and is therefore unknowable, except and unless He informs us about Himself. Until and unless He informs us about Himself. And although we can deduce basic knowledge about the Creator, such as that obviously He is the Creator and the one who has knowledge, the one who has power, the one who has will, the one who has wisdom, we can use reason to deduce these types of attributes. However, this is not the basic principle, or this is not the principle upon which we speak about Allah and what He can be described with and what He cannot be described with. And the clear proof of that, to show why this is not the case, is the fact that if you just reflect upon the whole of mankind as a whole, and you look at the way in which man has differed in describing what they claim to be their Lord or the Creator, right? And you look at all the different religions, the different sects, the different groups, you see that there's so much contradiction, controversy, and part of that is because the intellect is made the foundation, and part of that also is because that they are relying upon a distorted revelation, a corrupted revelation, right? So this is a clear proof that reason itself is not sufficient to acquire authentic knowledge about the Creator. So therefore, the basic principle then is the khabar meaning the report, meaning the authentic report which has come from Allah. And that is either the book or it is what the Messenger of Allah, what he spoke with from the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal gave to him. So since the revelation is the basic foundation, is the principle upon which we speak about Allah, then when we look at the Quran, we will find within the Quran a clear methodology as to how Allah speaks about Himself. And so therefore that becomes our methodology as well. Because this is what Allah Azza wa Jal He intended. This is the knowledge He gave to His servants. So what is this methodology that we find in the Quran and likewise in the Sunnah? Well, it is those principles that we have covered in previous lessons. First of all, we see that Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions things about Himself in affirmation in a very specific sense, right? So He mentions the names explicitly and very specifically, that He is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, Al-Salam, Al-Mu'min, Al-Aziz, Al-Alim, Al-Hakim, and so on and so forth. And similarly, He mentions about Himself, attributes that He has, and He also mentions actions that He does. The creation of the heavens and the earth, guiding people, misguiding people, being pleased with some people, being angry with other people, and so on and so forth. So all of this is in a very specific sense. And then we see when it comes to negation is done in a very general sense. Allah has no partner, Allah has no equal, Allah has no rival, Allah has no like. And if there are specific negations, then they are for a reason. It is for a reason. So the Christians say Allah has a son. So Allah negates that he has a son. The Jews say that Allah's hands are tied, meaning out of niggardliness. Allah refutes that claim that Allah's hands are tied. And, Allah denies that he oppresses his servants, right? And so on and so forth. And so we covered those principles in the previous lessons. We covered maybe 6 or 7 principles we established which summarize what has come in the Quran. And if we understand those principles well, then we are ready to move to the next stage of the book. And the next stage of the book is looking at how various groups, they deviated from this methodology, and the various positions they hold and the various arguments they use. And so before we proceed into looking at how Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, how he has systematically gone through each of these groups and refuted their doubts in a systematic step-by-step fashion, before we do that, we have to first of all understand, okay, so what are these groups, what are they saying? And why are they saying what they are saying? How are they acquiring their creed? What principles are they using to speak about Allah? Right? And this is what we started looking at in the previous lesson. And the essence of the previous lesson was that, in a nutshell, what came into Islam in the 2nd century after Hijrah through certain individuals like Jahm bin Safwan and Ja'ad bin Dirham was that they were mixing with the Jews, with the Christians, with the Sabi'a, the Sabaeans, with certain Hindu kind of like the Sumaniya, which are like a type of Hindu Buddhist type people. And this man Jahm was debating with these people, debating in religion, and he acquired some of that philosophical baggage that these nations themselves had been influenced with many centuries earlier, right? So this speech that you are going to hear and that you're going to see, which you see in this handout from last week, this language, the Jews, the Christians and the Sabaeans were already poisoned with this type of speech before Islam. And that itself came from the Greek philosophers. Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, and others similar to them. And what these people were doing is that they were using reason to try and define what they believed to be divine perfection. What is divine perfection? Right? And they were using pure reason. And they ended up having an idea of the first cause, as they call him, or the prime mover, as they call him, an idea which is really only just an idea in the mind only, right? The way they present this maker or mover or first cause really amounts to just an idea in the mind that doesn't exist outside of the mind, right? Something very abstract, which is just a concept. Right? It ends up being just a concept in the mind and nothing else. And they if you look on the sheet I gave you, there's something called, and also the back of this sheet here as well, the one I gave you today, right? There's something called Aristotle's 10 categories, right? This is Aristotle trying to describe everything that we see around us, right? It is a substance, and then it has certain properties. It is in a place, it has quantity, it has how, all this type of stuff. And they said that Allah must be, or not Allah to them, but the first cause or the prime mover must be completely other than what we see, right? And they ended up, through this philosophy, in reducing the maker to really just a concept in the mind, who has no names, who has no attributes, right? Who has no actions, who has no activity, right? So it is impossible to think of anything without it having at least one attribute, right? Nothing can exist except with an attribute. If you claim something exists without any attributes, that thing is a figment of the imagination only, right? Because, first of all, existence is actually an attribute. Being is an attribute, right? So it's impossible for something to exist without having any attributes. So therefore, the notion of a creator that these people had was really ended up being just a concept in the mind. And then the idea of perfection to them was to negate these things from the maker, right? To negate these things from the maker. He's not a body. He's not a substance. He's not in a place. He doesn't have activity. He doesn't this, he doesn't that. Right? So this now is what we call the negative theology. The negative theology, meaning you speak about the Creator only in negatives. He's not deaf. He's not blind. Right? He's not unwise. He's not unjust. But really, this is not really providing any actual knowledge about the Creator. Right? Making negatives is not really giving any positive knowledge about the Creator. Right, so this philosophy here, this way of speaking about the Creator, as we said, it affected the Jews, it affected the Christians, it affected the Sabi'ah, and these factions were present in the Muslim lands, in Damascus, in Harran, in many other places, and there was debate, dialogue, discussion taking place, and these individuals like Jahm bin Safwan, Al-Ja'd bin Dirham, they are the ones who began to introduce this language and this culture of debate and argument with, Christians, Jews, and others. And they began to speak with this language in the 2nd century after Hijrah, right? And they developed a theology exactly as you see on the first quote on the sheet which I gave to you last week, that this guy called Jahm bin Safwan, he was spreading a view or an idea about God which was remarkably different from that of his contemporaries, and yet remarkably like the negative theology current in later Greek Neo-Platonism. Right. So at this stage, you know where this language came from, right? And this language, you will not find this language in the Quran. You will not find this language upon the tongue of any messenger. And nor are we as Muslims in need of the philosophy of anybody to help us understand what Allah is and what He is not, and what He can be described with and what He cannot be described with. We are not in need of any philosopher, Muslim or non-Muslim, right, to help us because this implies as if the Quran hasn't brought us guidance, as if Allah did not, in the most clear and the most, very direct and the most, the way which is free of ambiguity, that somehow Allah didn't provide us with knowledge and speech by which we can have knowledge of what He is, what His names are, what His attributes are. It's impossible for that to be the case. So we are not in need of this philosophy. However, these groups, they took this, and so we have here on the sheet that you have, and if the sisters, there are some sheets outside the entrance to the sisters' hall, should be on the floor. If you haven't got them, then you can take some. There's about 10 or there's some copies there. Inshallah, you can take them from there. So on the sheet, you can see that we have 5 columns, and these are the 4 groups that we are going to speak about a little today, inshallah, just so that we understand exactly what each group is saying. These are the 4 groups that we are going to look at their arguments and exactly what they are saying. So the first column are the philosophers, the falasifa. And so here we are really speaking about Aristotle, Plato, and also those who ascribed to the Muslims who were upon what those philosophers were upon. And from them specifically is Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina. Right? Ibn Sina, you might have heard of this man. He's known as Avicenna to the Europeans. And he's known in the worldly sciences as, the one who wrote a lot on medicine. And he's well known for medicine, principles of medicine. He was very shrewd, very smart, very clever. And his book, the Qanun, on medicine, really is the foundation of modern medicine. But what this shows is that intelligence in the worldly sciences does not necessitate being guided in the prophetic sciences. Right? So just because someone is really shrewd and smart and clever and intelligent in the worldly sense, and there are many people of the world who are like this, even among the non-Muslims, very, very shrewd and smart people, amazing at what they do and know and understand in the worldly sciences. Yet they are completely, and yet they can be completely and utterly misguided in the sciences of prophethood, from which is knowledge of Allah. So Ibn Sina, Avicenna, as we said, he was someone who was upon this doctrine of the philosophers, the falasifa. And as you can see on the sheet, there should be some sheets. So what is the basic idea of the philosophers? What's their notion of how they describe the creator, which they call the first cause or the prime mover? They say that the first cause or the prime mover, the way they describe him is pretty much like just a concept in the mind, right? They say things like, he is pure beauty. He is, like perfection. He is, but these are just, there's no real knowledge, and it's just an idea in the mind. He is one, right? And then they have these other statements. He is without a body. He is without parts. He is without activity. He's not in a place, right? This is the language of Aristotle, right? Because they're trying to make the creator to be completely unlike and completely other than what we see in the creation and the concepts we derive from our experience, right? Can you see the problem with this? The problem with this is that there are many things which are shared between Allah and the creation in terms of the meanings of the attributes, right? Allah has knowledge, we have knowledge. Allah has wisdom, men can have wisdom. Allah hears, men hear. Allah sees, we see, right? And had it not been for the fact that there has to be some shared meaning, it would be impossible for us to acquire knowledge about Allah. Do you understand? Because we can only understand meanings on the basis of what we know and what we experience, right? And from our knowledge, from our experience, we know that there is a thing or a meaning which is knowledge, and there's a thing and a meaning which is hearing, and a meaning which is seeing, and a meaning which is wisdom, and a meaning which is power, right? This is how we understand these things. And through those meanings, we are able to understand when Allah Azza wa Jal informs us that He is the hearing, the seeing, the powerful, the wise, and so on and so forth. Had it not been the case that there's something that's shared in terms of the meaning, we would never, ever, ever be able to have any knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It would not be possible if that wasn't the case. So the mistake of these people here, the philosophers, when they basically try to, when they have this idea that the Creator's perfection lies in being completely and totally unlike His creation, then employing that principle means you are going to deny all the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because now, why is this? Because you're going to argue along the lines, well, if Allah has mercy, then we only experience mercy coming from people, and mercy is kind of like an attribute that exists in a body. So if we say Allah has mercy, and He has an attribute called mercy, then He must have a body to have that attribute. Like the created bodies that we see, essences like this, or like me as an entity, or like whatever it might be. This is the basic reasoning, right? And so on this basis, they are denying pretty much all of the names and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So their understanding is, if you look on the other side of the sheet, right, their idea or their notion of perfection for the Creator is negating all of these things. This is the speech, right? Allah is not a substance. Allah is not a body. Allah does not, does not have quantity. Allah does not have, any relation or place, or Allah is not bound by time. Allah does not have action. He doesn't act, because activity implies change, implies something has changed, right? He does not have affection, right? This is their idea of speaking about what they believe to be the first cause or the prime mover. Is this what the prophets and messengers came with? This is not what the prophets and messengers came with. These people, obviously, they are misguided away from revelation, and they are trying to understand nature. They are trying to create like a science, physics, and then a metaphysics. What is beyond nature, right? So they're trying to understand nature first of all, which is this, and then this is physics, and then they're trying to develop a notion of metaphysics. What's beyond physics, and what is from the unseen. And then they're trying to speak about the unseen, in this case about the Creator and the Maker, using language that's founded upon what they've studied in nature. And all of this they are doing without having a book from Allah, right? Being far, far astray from any revealed book or from the teachings of any messenger. And so they rely upon the intellect, and so this was the basic idea they came to. And what does this amount to? This amounts to just a concept in the mind, right? The Creator is no more than just a concept in the mind. This thing does not have any true existence outside of the mind, right? Why is that? It's because it is impossible for anything to exist without having at least one attribute. Nothing can exist except having at least one attribute. So therefore, this position of, saying Allah has no attributes, has no names, He cannot be named, He does not have any attributes, He doesn't have any activity, because this would imply change in His essence, and so on and so forth, then really you are describing something, impossible, which exists only as an idea in the mind. And that's why we all know that the mind can think of things which don't have any existence in external reality. You can think of so many things. You can think of an elephant that flies, but no elephant flies. But you can imagine it in your mind. That doesn't mean that it actually exists externally. And so similarly, when it comes to these kind of notions, very abstract notions, this is what these people fell into, the philosopher, the Aristotle, Plato, and this affected many nations. In fact, these individuals here, Aristotle and Plato, who are misguided, star-worshipping, idolaters, polytheists, they corrupted many a nation. They corrupted the creed of the Jews, right? The Jews were affected by this. They started speaking the same thing as you see the Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila, Ash'ariyya, Maturidiyya. The Christians were affected by this as well. Christians were affected by this before Islam, centuries before Islam. And then after Islam, this was brought into Islam by way of Jahm bin Safwan, Al-Ja'd bin Dirham, and this is where we have this speech among the Muslims, where they base their creed around these basic concepts. Anyway, this is the philosophers, right? Now, among the Muslims, I said is Ibn Sina, Avicenna, Al-Farabi is another one. They were affected by the speech of these philosophers, Aristotle, Plato. And they held certain positions, such as, for example, the universe is eternal. The universe has always been there. It is present alongside Allah. Right? Allah is its cause, but they exist as a contemporaneous cause and effect. Right? Allah, the universe exists by virtue of Allah's existence. Allah does not precede the universe, but Allah is the cause of the universe. He only precedes the universe because He is the cause of the universe, but they exist at the same time. Right? This is the view that these people held on the basis of the ideas of the Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Plato. This is the first main idea. The second main idea was that there is no such thing as resurrection. There is no such thing as a bodily resurrection. The bodies will not be resurrected. And the soul is eternal. It's the soul which is eternal. And the bodies will not be resurrected. That's the second main idea. And the third main idea is that prophethood is nothing more than, it's a property that can be acquired. People can become prophets because prophethood, what is prophethood to them? Prophethood to them is simply, these are very, very clever, shrewd men who have a very powerful imagination. They have a powerful imagination. They're able to use the mind, and to, have very creative imagination. And they observe and see that if they tell the people stories which are not true, right, they can help people to live better moral lives. Right? This is how they explain the prophets. Right? And that anybody can become a prophet by training, and as long as you have you are very intelligent and you have a very creative mind, and this is what they say, this is what they believe. So as you can see, this first column, the falasifa, who we refer to as Aristotle, Plato, and the mutafalsifa. Right? This is another word. Mutafalsifa means the pseudo-philosophers. The falasifa are the Greek philosophers. When we use the word falasifa, we are speaking about Aristotle, Plato. When we say mutafalsifa, this means those who try to be like the philosophers. These are the pseudo-philosophers. So these are the likes of Ibn Sina and people like him. And this was their view, right? The universe is eternal. There is no bodily resurrection. The soul is eternal. And prophethood is something which is simply acquired. Anybody can acquire it as long as you have the right traits and qualities, and with sufficient training, you can become a prophet. That's what they said. Okay, so this is the first column, the philosophers, and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is going to address these people, because these people have a lot of misguidance in the way that they speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second column then is the Jahmiyyah, right? And so these people appeared at the beginning of the 2nd century, 100 Hijrah, 110 Hijrah, 120 Hijrah, 130 Hijrah. They appeared as a group. And they started speaking with this type of language amongst the Muslims, amongst the Salaf. Allah is not a body. Allah is not in a place. Allah is not defined. We can't define Allah. Allah is not, it does not occupy space. Allah does not change. Allah is immutable. Where is this language coming from? Is this language from the Quran? Or this is coming from Greek philosophy through the Jews, Christians, right? And on account of this, these people were saying statements, not directly, but they were saying statements that the Salaf recognized what they were trying to say, right? Like you have statements from, many of the early Salaf saying that Jahm and his companions, they are revolving around the issue of trying to say there is no Lord above the creation, right? Because they were speaking with this language. If you speak with this language, Allah is not in a place. Allah does not have spatial occupation. Allah is not in a direction. Allah. Okay, so what do you mean then? What are you trying to say? Because in the Quran, Allah has told us, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa. Allah has ascended above His throne. He's told us that the angels ascend to Him. He's told us that the good word, the kalim al-tayyib, which is La ilaha illallah, it ascends to Him. And the righteous actions, He raises them, right? All of this, many evidences in the Quran that clearly show to us that Allah is above His creation. But you guys are saying, Allah is not in a place, Allah is not in a location, Allah does not have direction, Allah does not occupy space. Like, it seems like you're trying to say there's no Lord above the heaven, right? So the Salaf, they clearly understood what these people were basically trying to say. And so when they realized that the type of deity these people are, describing, it is something that is going to lead to atheism, right? Because this type of speech really, like we said, what are you describing? If Allah has no names, if Allah has no attributes, if Allah has no actions, and we can't describe Him with any name or any attribute, really what you've done is you've reduced the Creator to really a concept in the mind only. Right? A concept in the mind only, nothing more. So the Salaf recognized that this is a call to atheism. And that's why some of the Salaf said that the Jahmi who is a Mu'attil, who is a negator or a denier, he is a worshipper of nothingness. He worships nothing. Because such a thing they're describing is nothing. This doesn't exist. This type of deity does not exist. So these Jahmiyyah, who are the second group here, they are the closest to the philosophers, right? So they basically say they deny all names of Allah, they deny all the attributes of Allah, and they claim that if we were to ascribe any attribute to Allah, we would automatically make Him to be like the created beings and the created bodies. Why? Because for anything to have an attribute, it has to have a body. A body. And the only way we see bodies is what we see around us. These bodies are composed, everything that we see is a body because it's composed of atoms and this and so on and so forth. And so therefore, it's not possible for Allah to have attributes. Right? And so ultimately, so again, notice how their entire speech about Tawheed and Allah's oneness is on the basis of this type of philosophy and this negative theology. Allah is not a body. Allah is not a substance. Allah is not in a place. Allah does not have direction. Allah does not have parts. Allah does not have passions, meaning Allah does not become pleased and angry. Allah does not act, doesn't have any activity, meaning Allah does not speak. Allah does not act. Allah does not create. Allah does not provide. Allah does not guide. Allah does not misguide. Right? This is what they mean. Right? So if this is what you are saying and you are making all these negations, then really you are describing Allah with nothingness, and Allah to you is nothing but a concept in the mind only. Right? So this is the Jahmiyyah. Right? So when they have this idea, then they look in the Quran and they see in the Quran Allah is above his throne. Allah shows mercy. Allah shows mercy. Mercy is number 8. Mercy is affectation. Affectation means, it means that Allah shows mercy and compassion to somebody, or he becomes angry with somebody, or he becomes pleased. Right? This is what they mean by affectation. Right? So these Jahmiyyah were looking at the Quran because they believe this is divine perfection. Then they look at the Quran and they see Allah is above the throne, and Allah becomes angry, and Allah becomes pleased, and Allah, as Allah says, affirms for himself, Allah has a face. Right? And then they think, right, okay, what is in the Quran is anthropomorphism. Right? Meaning that the language of the Quran is such that if we leave it as it is, then it renders Allah to be like a body, right? Like the created beings, right? So they had this evil perception towards the texts, whereas we know in the Quran, laysa kamithlihi shay. Yes, Allah has these names. Yes, Allah has these attributes which he mentioned about himself. But we know that the realities can never be the same. Right? We've been through this in the previous lessons. We said even, for example, within the creation, we know that there are jinn, there are angels, and there's the soul. For example, we know the soul speaks. We know the jinn are able to speak and they eat and whatever. But, we have no idea about the reality of the jinn and its speech and its face and its hands and its power. We've got no idea because we don't know the reality of its essence, right? So if it is possible for the jinn and men and the angels to share in certain qualities like knowledge and power and speech, yet the realities are totally different and unlike each other, then how can it not be the case that the difference, therefore, between the creator and the created is even more so, it is even more acceptable that, yes, there is that, complete lack of likeness in the actual realities, even though the attributes, the meanings are the same, right? Do you understand? It's very, very clear. So these people, Tawheed to them became going through the Quran systematically, finding every verse where there may be a hint of tajseem, meaning, affirming attributes for Allah, and then claiming that this is, or we have to now understand this figuratively, and we have to understand this metaphorically. It's not really, Allah does not really mean he becomes angry, because anger is just like a human passion, it's a defect. So Allah doesn't mean he becomes angry. Anger must mean something else, right? Or Allah becomes pleased. Oh, it can't really mean a pleasure, a rida. It must mean something else, because we can't ascribe this to Allah, right? Allah can't be above his throne because, above is a direction. And when you say direction, that implies a place, a makan. And if you ascribe a place for Allah, a makan, it means he must be occupying that space. And if he's occupying that space, he must therefore be a body. And now we've just made him like the bodies in the creation. Right? See the way of thinking. Right? You start with this Aristotelian metaphysics. Right? And then you use that as the goggles. You put the goggles, these are your goggles, and now you're looking at the Quran through these goggles. And when you read the verses in the Quran, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, Ar-Rahman ascended above his throne, what they see is different to what we are seeing. We are seeing that this is a revelation from Allah. Allah tells us that He has a true and real existence. He has an essence. He is true and real, not just a figment in the mind, right? So, there can only be a number of possibilities. Either He created the creation in Himself, which is impossible, right? Or He created the creation and then He entered the creation, which is impossible, right? Or He is the creation, which again is impossible. Or He is other than the creation, right? If He's other than the creation, then the only relationship He can have to the creation is that He is above His creation, and that's exactly what He told us in the Quran, right? And all of this philosophical babble about, place, direction, implies this, whatever, this is philosophical babble. Right? We are not seeing that, right? Because we are not wearing these spectacles or these goggles, right? So this is what the Jahmiyyah are seeing when they read the Quran, right? It's through this poison, through this philosophy. So basically, the Jahmiyyah and the philosophers, you see that they are very close to each other in this extreme negation, right? And what they are calling to is reducing Allah to a concept in the mind only, and this is a call to pure atheism. It leads to pure atheism. So if you start coming to a person and saying, oh no, Allah, it doesn't mean that Allah does not have a place. Allah cannot be defined by place, right? The dangerous thing about this, as some of the Salaf actually said, they said that the speech of Jahm bin Safwan, the first part of it is honey and the end part of it is poison, right? And if you actually do go to people who are ignorant and you start telling them, God is so perfect, Allah is so perfect that, He is, He's without limits and He's immutable. He cannot change because He's perfect. And He is without a place. He doesn't need a place. Right? This actually sounds nice and it sounds true. And it sounds like you are somehow glorifying Allah and, speaking of His perfection. And if a person doesn't know any better, it's only going to be a matter of time. It's only going to be a matter of time when, if you take this philosophy to its natural conclusion, you are going to end up with a belief in Allah in which He is no more than a mere concept in the mind only. Right? This is what will actually happen, because this is where the philosophy actually leads you to. It's just like a road, right? You come to a road and you think, shall I take this road or not? And at that point, you don't really know what's at the end of the road, right? 5 miles down, 10 miles down, 100 miles down. You don't know what's there. This is what this is like, right? You start down that road, and then you'll be forced to continue until you come to an outcome which is disastrous. So this is what the Jahmiyyah are upon. They deny all names for Allah, all attributes for Allah, all actions for Allah. They speak about Him in pure negations. They see the Quran as a book of tajseem and tashbih, right? Of a book of anthropomorphism. And somehow, therefore, they have to explain this. They have to say, oh, no. Allah just had to use this language, just to make the people kind of understand the concepts. But that's not really, what is really meant. These are just allegories and metaphors and figurative speech. And no, Allah doesn't have wisdom. Allah doesn't have mercy. Allah doesn't become angry, doesn't become pleased, whatever. And then they start, explaining all of this away. Right? So this is the Jahmiyyah. Next, we have the Mu'tazila, the third group, the Mu'tazila. And these people, they took this idea from the Jahmiyyah, right? They were present in the same time period. The heads of the Mu'tazila, Amr bin Ubaid al-Mu'tazili, Amr bin Ubaid, and Wasil bin Ata, these are the heads of the Mu'tazila. They were present in the early 2nd century, around the same time as Jahm bin Safwan, al-Ja'ad bin Dirham. So the Mu'tazila took this idea from the Jahmiyyah. Right? Now what the Mu'tazila did is that they realized that you cannot deny the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what they did was that they said, we affirm the names of Allah, but these names don't signify any attributes. Right? Now if you think about that, what are they really saying is the following. What they are really saying is the following. That Allah is wise but without wisdom. Allah is the knowing but without knowledge. Allah is the merciful but without mercy. Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense? You know, like if I said about a man, you know, this man, Abdullah, Zayd, whatever, he's generous, but not a single act of generosity has ever occurred from him. Can that be true? How can you call someone generous? You can only call someone generous because he has the attribute of generosity. Otherwise you can't call him generous. Right? So how can this even make sense? What they were trying to do, what the Mu'tazila were trying to do, is they realized, hang on, this thing doesn't really, to be honest, what they were really trying to do is they were trying to remove the scorn and the criticism from themselves, because everybody knows the futility of denying the names of Allah. So what they did was they made what really is like an outward show of affirming the names. Right? But you're not really affirming the names. If you say Allah is Al-Qadir, Allah is Ar-Rahim, Allah is Al-Hakim, right? Allah is the powerful, the wise, the merciful, but not with actual mercy or with actual power or with actual wisdom, then you're not really affirming the names, because every name automatically includes the attribute, right? If Allah is Ar-Rahim, automatically that means He has the attribute of mercy. If Allah is, Al-Hakim, automatically He has the attribute of wisdom. So this, what they were trying to do, it doesn't really make any sense. And but anyhow, they took this position, we affirm the name. So outwardly and apparently, the Mu'tazila, they affirm the names, right? So they say, yes, we affirm Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, because how can you deny this when this is in the Quran? Right? Allah is mentioning this in the Quran, that He is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Qudus. So you've got no way of denying that. But then they say, okay, He has the names, but those names do not signify any attribute. So really, you are really like the Jahmiyyah, but you are simply playing word games to avoid being lumped with the Jahmiyyah. Do you understand? Right? So they deny the attributes, but they affirm the names outwardly and apparently. As for the attributes, what do the Mu'tazila say about the attributes? Their position is that Allah cannot have attributes, because if He did have attributes, that would mean that there are multiple entities which are eternal with Allah. Right? If you say Allah and His knowledge, Allah and His mercy, Allah and His wisdom, Allah and His power, you've just now attributed 4 other eternal things alongside Allah, and therefore you've made the Creator to be composite. Allah is now composite of 5 things. Allah, then His knowledge, His mercy, His wisdom, His power. Is this correct? Is this correct or not? Right? They are saying, okay, you created a multiplicity of gods. Is this correct or not? Is the attribute of a thing a separate entity or not? Yes or no? Of course it's not. Right? the attributes of a thing are not a separate entity. Do you understand? What are these people doing? What's the mistake they're making? They are confusing what a person does in his mind between what is outside, right? So for example, I take a man, there's a man, right? That man is one man, yes? Just one man, right? But that man is a father, he's a husband, and he's a tailor, he makes clothes, and he's generous. Are there now four men? Are there four men? Okay. These names that I've given are on the basis of what the mind is doing of separating out the various attributes of that one man. Yes? And that's the nature of the mistake of the Mu'tazila. Right? They are treating the attributes as if it is a separate entity to the being. Right? But that is something what the mind does. Right? When you try to understand, it's your mind which is making these categories and distinctions. Right? And what is in the mind does not always reflect actual reality. Right? So this is the mistake that they made. And on that basis they said, oh, if you say Allah and His knowledge, Allah and His power, and Allah and His wisdom, and you are now, there are multiple entities, you're saying multiple things are eternal with Allah. This is futile, false speech. It's not true. Right? We say Allah with His knowledge. Look at the wording. They say Allah and His knowledge. Allah and His mercy. That's not what we're saying. We're saying Allah with His knowledge. Allah with His power. Allah with His mercy. Allah is always, He's eternal with all of His attributes. And these are attributes of His essence. And His essence is one. Right? There's no multiplicity of gods as they claim. This is all the danger of using philosophy to try to, deduce knowledge about the Creator. Right? You think you are being smart, you think you're being intelligent, but you are not. Right? You will go far astray. Right? So this is the Mu'tazila. Their general notion of Tawheed is Allah is not composed. Allah is not murakkab. Therefore Allah cannot have any attributes. Clear? Right? Okay. This is number 3. This is the third column. What I want you to realize before we stop, inshallah, is, in fact, if you read at the bottom, if you read the sentence at the bottom, right? Really, there are only two coherent viewpoints, right? There are only two viewpoints which are internally coherent and consistent, yes? Right? If you try to take a middle path anywhere in between, you are going to be full of contradiction, right? So on this side here, philosophers, this side here, right? These people are actually consistent. They are coherent, meaning they bring a principle and they stick to that principle, right? So they say Allah is completely unlike the bodies and the substances and whatever, and so therefore the only way we can describe Allah is that we can't really ascribe any attribute to Him. We can only describe Him in negatives, and really, the only way that can exist is really a concept in the mind. So Allah is really just an abstract notion of perfection, and really that's it. And that's what they adhere to, right? That's consistent, isn't it? Yeah? Right? On this side is the people of Tawheed and the Sunnah. We say that Allah is the one who gives us knowledge about Himself, and whatever He informed us with, we accept it and we believe it without likening the realities of His attributes to the creation. And anything which is mentioned very clearly as an attribute of His in the Quran and the Sunnah, we say this is Allah's attribute, but its reality is unlike the realities of what we find in the creation. And we apply this to everything which is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because Allah is the one who is most knowledgeable of His own self, and the messenger is the most knowledgeable of Allah, and the messenger spoke and brought the Quran, which is the most eloquent and clear of speech, which informs us about Allah in the most clear and eloquent of ways, right? So here, what we do is, if we come across an attribute in the Quran, Allah has mercy, Allah becomes angry, Allah becomes pleased, Allah has a face unlike the faces of His creation, and all the other attributes, we have no problem. Right? We know that there is no likeness. We know that there is no anthropomorphism, because we believe لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So we affirm the attributes upon the principle of negation of any likeness, right? This is a uniform, coherent principle over here. Now, if you're in the middle, like the Mu'tazila and the Ash'ari and Maturidiyya, and you try to take a middle ground, you are going to be full of contradictions, right? So, for example, the Jahmiyyah here will say to the Mu'tazila, you guys are anthropomorphists. You are Mujassima. Why? Because you say Allah is the all-powerful, and the all-wise, and the all-merciful. These are names, and names can only be given to things which are substances and bodies. Therefore, you have likened Allah to His creation. That's what these guys, the Jahmiyyah, can say to these guys, because these guys, the Mu'tazila, are trying to affirm the names, even if just only outwardly, not really in substance. Now, they've brought a problem upon themselves, because these guys, whose philosophy they are sharing, are now accusing them of being Mujassima, Mushabbiha, whatever, right? And then these guys will fall into even worse contradiction, the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, which we shall speak of, inshallah, in the next lesson, because they affirm only 7 attributes. They say reason affirms 7 attributes, and they deny the rest, right? So then, these can also be accused of being Mujassima, by the Mu'tazila. You get what I'm saying? So anywhere in between, you are going to fall into wicked, blatant contradictions. You will not have any answers. So there are only 2 coherent viewpoints. You are either over there with the philosophers and their philosophy, which came from star-worshipping idolaters, or you're going to have to be over here with the followers of the prophets and messengers, right? And that's why there is no third viewpoint, right? You might be here, but the actual true outcome and consequence of what you're saying is going to push you and tug you in this direction. If you remain rationally consistent, you are going to be pushed in that direction the more that you realize about your contradictions, right? And so this is really what I've described here in today's lesson. This is what is going to be pointed and highlighted in the lessons to follow, right? When Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, when he goes on to now look at the arguments that these people bring and the counter arguments, it will become clear that at the end of all of the debate and discussion, the only place left to be is either here or either here. Do you understand? Right? So inshallah, we stop there for today. We've got one more group here, the Ash'aris and Maturidis. As you can see, very clear that they claim that reason establishes only 7 attributes, and they deny the attributes which are known by the khabar, the other attributes, Allah being above His throne, Allah has a face and things like that. They deny these things because they claim this is tajseem and tashbih. But inshallah, we'll briefly describe that in the next lesson, and then once that is concluded, we can then start on the next section of the book, inshallah ta'ala, so that we can more clearly see the incoherence of all of these groups, and how the only position you can have is the position of the people of Tawheed and the Sunnah, which we've already explained in the first 10 lessons. It is those 6 or 7 principles that we covered in the initial lessons. So with that, we bring today's lesson to a close. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Afwan. Wa huwa as-sami'ul basir. Afwan, in the lesson, I mistakenly said wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. It is wa huwa as-sami'ul basir. Jazakallahu khairan.